Kojo Ponkroma is the Deputy Information Minister. He's also a Member of Parliament for the Ofuasha Irebe constituency, and Suleiman Ibrahim is Executive Director of the Media Foundation for West Africa. Gentlemen, good evening to you. Thank you for joining us this evening. Now, let me start off with where Professor Jampo ended. Sule, is this a clear reflection of what happened today, so that, in his view, journalists did not acquit themselves, well, at least those who had the opportunity to ask the questions?
Well, we have just released a 4-page statement on sharing our perspectives on what happened today. I don't think that it would be entirely right to suggest that there weren't any good questions that were asked. I think it would be fair to say that, well, some questions that were asked didn't meet expectations, and indeed the paper that we've put out there, we tried to share what our top 3 questions were and what our worst
What were your top 3
questions were. We thought that the question on security that was asked by High Momin of GBC was a very solid question, was given proper background, good contextualization, and the question was clear. It wasn't asked in a close-ended manner to allow the president to say yes or no to that. I think that the question that came from Bernard, even though one would say is a bit narrow, it's important that he made reference to what the president had said during the State of the Nation's address, as well as the last Meet the Press encounter, and actually quoted from those platforms. And the fact that he was referring to a policy or a program that the president had indicated would be rolled out by end of year.
Just for the sake of time, I'm going to ask you to do, just run through the last third one and then the bottom 3 just for me, without giving me
I think in terms of the bottom 3, there was a question about the 2012 presidential petition and the fact that the president accepted it. Does he think it constitutes a hallmark in the Fourth Republic? And that was a question that had no context. One wonders what the relevance of the question is at this time. There was also a question about why foreign dignitaries were trooping in the view of the journalist. It was unprecedented, and our view is, well, it was something that was remarkable, but we cannot say it's unprecedented. But then what is the context? What is the relevance? Was it a question to provide an opportunity for the president to tout his achievements, or the administration's performance, or what about that? And then there was also a third question that the president himself was not too clear about. A question that came from a gentleman from AKFM in Sunyani, whether or not incumbency is an advantage or disadvantage. It wasn't even quite clear. And one wonders what the purpose of the question was.
I see. So could you put together this event. I mean, it is your ministry that superintends over it, for the lack of better expression. I want to hear some of these questions and the analysis, the post-analysis of this particular event. How does it get to you? Some of the questions that come and the reactions that the public gives after the whole event.
I think for us, this event is part of the exercise of accountability to the people of Ghana, to create a platform for the president to articulate what he has done over a 6-month period, and to subject himself to some questioning and critique from the people of Ghana through the media. I look at it from this perspective. To the extent that the people are pleased with the questions that were asked, then it means that the exercise elicited the kind of questions that were agitating the minds of Ghanaians. If the majority of Ghanaians do not share the view that the questions that were asked represented what they were thinking, then that will be the verdict at the end of the day. For us, our interest is in creating the platform and taking the feedback that comes to us, and then also to the journalism community.
But sometimes when you have certain questions that per the analysis doesn't really cut and hit the mark in terms of representing the issues that bothers on the people as it is, do you really think that your objectives are being achieved? Because obviously you put this together because you want journalists to ask the president questions about issues of national concern. Then you have people coming in to ask the president whether the president is cool and feeling good.
I don't think that in terms of substance. I mean, people, and at the beginning we cautioned that let's avoid long preambles and long background, and try and hit it as quickly as possible so that other people would have an opportunity to ask their questions too. In that spirit, I don't see maybe a passing comment that somebody may have made, or even an attempt at a joke, to be so much out of order. But suffice to say that those who got the opportunity to ask questions, not everybody got that opportunity, but those who got the opportunity to ask questions, in my view, had a lot of questions that hit on various things: corruption, security, the economy, infrastructure, agriculture, etc., representing various parts of the country. Now, another thing to note is that sometimes when you're sitting in Accra, you think that a particular question is a moot question. But when you travel across a country, I have just recently returned from a trip to other parts of the country. The question from the Brong-Ahafo region, for example, is a big deal in the Brong-Ahafo region. The Cashew Development Board and the issues to do with what they call cashew roads is a big issue. So you may be sitting in Accra and thinking that some of these questions are
that was one of the good questions.
Yeah, so you may be sitting and crying thinking that a particular question is not good enough, but for the various constituencies, and our society is dynamic, for the various constituencies that are being represented,
there are many people who have had
these
reason to question the format of this particular, Meet the Press, so that if it's a day for the journalists, why should the president take about 30 minutes to talk before the opportunity is given to journalists to ask the questions, and then we are rushed through the process because there is no time, and some of us don't even get to ask the questions. So the question is, why do you bring so many journalists there, and then you tell us for lack of time you're unable to pick questions when it is our day? Sule.
Well, I think that is one of the observations that we have made in our position paper, that on the average you may say that the whole event lasted for about 2 hours, and then the president had, you spent about 40 minutes or so doing the introductory remarks, which as many may call a monologue. Again, we thought that it was a day for journalists, and the most important thing was to allow as many journalists as possible to ask questions that are on their minds. I believe that the president, given his position and his stature, has all the opportunities and all the platforms available to, at any point in time, articulate his concerns or issues. And so it's one of the recommendations that we have made, that in future encounters it will be important to ensure that more time is allocated for journalists to ask their questions. In the office, for example, when we were discussing, colleagues had a concern when the Honorable Minister for Information kept repeating that, well, the President wants to attend to other assignments, the President wants to attend to other activities and so on. Well, I said, well, of course, we cannot have the whole day doing this by the President, but colleagues thought that repeating that sort of almost send a message that, well, there are other important things than what was happening. And I thought that it would have been important to have more time for the journalists to
and Kojo, especially when Mustafa Amin stated before the encounter that it was going to be one media house, one question, emphasizing fairness, hoping that that was going to cut across. Then we have it while the program is on, we have that particular principle of fairness violated with two or more persons from the same media group asking the questions. And then, for example, for some of us from Media General, none of us, about 4 of us who were there, had the opportunity to ask the question. I saw you trying to get Mustafa to want to actually get to know that, look, Komla Kluches even stood up. We were asked to sit down. I'm not making the case for us personally, but it was a clear case of concern that, look, I mean, you can't rush through this process when there is really not much time and you do other things.
Alfred, thank you. So we had over an hour to take questions and to respond to questions. And all of this that we are getting for me is feedback. You notice that today we tried to improve on the very first one that we did. There was criticism from the first one that it was restricted to Accra predominantly. Today we had to bring in more people. So all of this is feedback for us to work with to improve. But we had about an hour to take questions. We also as journalists need to ask ourselves, is this how we want to pack our questions so that we can very quickly ask one snappy question on the go?
I mean, but you invited also so many journalists.
Well, and I'm coming to that one. Well, within 1 hour, you can get a lot of questions flying through. If you have questions, and like you said, there were times when the president had to ask, can you explain that question a bit well? Can you phrase it in a manner that I can answer? So it gives us as well some feedback. The other thing also is that within this 1 hour period, if you have a scenario where, people are running in perhaps a long preamble, etc., it limits how many people can ask those questions. But let us be honest, not every one of the about 200 journalists who was in the room will have an opportunity to fire a question. The best press conferences in all over the world, from Russia to America to wherever, not everybody has an opportunity to ask a question. But what we will seek to do as we move along is to find ways by which we can have, for example, those who didn't have an opportunity today have an opportunity the other time. I do recall that in the last press conference, Media General had an opportunity to ask a question, not so? In the last press conference.
Well, but I mean, that obviously doesn't justify
no,
the fact that
no, and there were other press conferences, you know,
other media houses
that didn't get an opportunity. Some of them got today, you didn't get. I've committed to you that in the next one,
I mean, if we want to use that same measure, then other media houses that had the opportunity the previous instance shouldn't have had opportunity.
That's a fair point to make. But what I'm saying is that, so as we go along, we will do well to try and give everybody an opportunity. This is not the first, this is not going to be the last as well.
Okay, but you see, there was this concern that the minority NDC is raising that, look, you made the point, the president made the point that they've cut down because of certain reviews that you made as a result of procurements. Now, they say that if there was bloated contracts and sometimes certificates forged about contracts that were not given, why didn't you not prosecute these people? So about, but rather, coming of the president
about two or three different things. First, the president talked about the ratio of sole sourcing that went through in the previous administration and how a lot of it is not happening in this administration, and therefore the fact that we are saving because we're allowing competitive tendering in a lot more processes than were happening. Secondly, then there's a second subject of claims that were submitted initially about 7 billion. When you ask the people to bring in invoices, it shot up to about 11 billion. The Auditor General was able to validate only about 5 billion. The other about 5 point something billion. You found a lot of people literally not coming back, or some coming back to concede that they've received some part payment and therefore they want to revise their invoices down. And he made the argument that it suggests to you that there was a lot of either bloating or claims that were not being properly placed. Now, the fact that the president outlines this data today and doesn't proceed to, for example, mention the names of the specific contractors, or doesn't proceed to say that today charges have been filed against these persons, does not mean that that can or will not happen. What he was doing today was reporting on what he has done to protect the public purse. Right. I do know that there's subsequent work that is going on. Let's watch and see. It'll be interesting.
We'll be watching to see how the script unfolds. But thank you.
Thank you.
Kojo Ponkoma is Deputy Information Minister, Member of Parliament for the Ofuashia Yoruba constituency, actually a member of the Finance Committee of Parliament. Also, Suleiman Abrahama is the Executive Director of the Media Foundation for West Africa. They've done a 4-page document on what just happened this afternoon. I'd love to see that document, Sule. Thank you, gentlemen. Grateful for your time this evening.